basically this movement, closer, this movement and this concept of unified or unification of religion from beginning of time, and this concept of progressive revelation, which is really successive manifestations of God or coming in and bring the humanity back in line as far as human interaction is concerned. So there is no really difference between these manifestations or prophets, as you might call. And as we see this infusion of energy into our system causes civilization to continuously increase and progress forward, which is really unique in the entire universe, this particular process. So, and the story really goes back of every religion follows laws of natural laws of deteriorating. And that's the reason the next manifestation comes in and redefine the human interaction that has to occur, because augmentation of civilization itself and apprehension of people to comprehend what new laws should be as far as interaction is concerned. So you can, for example, compare human interaction 1500 years ago to human interaction today. It wouldn't work. And this is really what the contrasts and conflicts that you see in the world is all about today. Because they think if they go back to those laws, then everybody would be happy because they were happy then. Obviously, when society has changed, comprehension of level of comprehension, level of interaction has changed, you need new laws. So this is really the contrast that you see, and of course it's in the media everywhere, that what is happening, and you have Jews against Muslims, Muslims against Christians, and so on and so forth, although every one of them believes in the same religion from the same God. So there is no two different gods. Although some Christians try to insinuate that Allah is a different God than Christian God, which is really not the case. So the deterioration of the religion is something natural, and its cause is very simple. It's described, it's because humans try to interpret those laws to their advantage, and then they create conflict. So after about 1,000 years, the religion itself changes. It becomes mostly manufactured by humans as opposed to the original message that came in. So the key really here is that this unification is something very new, and up to basically Baha'i religion, due to lack of education or comprehension of ordinary people, this institution of clergy or learned people was necessary for humanity to absorb these laws. And out of those, the social and basically civil law was created. For example, if you look at American law, it came from Judeo-Christian background. The jurisprudence, same thing, for example, Islamic law. What you see, Sharia, they call it, it came out of translation or interpretation of the Quranic law, and they created that basically jurisprudence. Now, ironically, obviously, this is an extraction. And so after a while, you see conflict gets created. Now you have two branches of Sunnis and Shiites, and they're at each other's throat right now They're reading the same book, but they're translating it differently. So this is the reason, and majority, almost every religion that you can think of, including Islam or Christianity, foretelling that unification of mankind would come. The elimination of prejudices would come. Day of resurrection and day of judgment would come. And this is really the time where basically all the beliefs of individuals would get tested. When the new manifestation comes in, do we accept it, or we want to keep our comfort level before? So the story that we're following here is that this is a paradigm shift that occurred, that now the concept of unity of mankind is the promise of the day that every other manifestation has foretold. So the question becomes of if this would have been left to humans, we would have created our own roadmap, and guess what? Up to now, we haven't figured it out. Whatever we produce doesn't yield the outcome that we want. So what happened in this manifestation, not only those laws came in, as far as human interaction and of course spiritual laws, the blueprint of how to achieve it has come also. So the first thing is that we can't interpret Holy Spirit or writings of the Baha'u'llah by ourselves for everybody. So there is no priest. There is no leader of religion, or there is no status. There is no caste system. Status because I read too many books, I'm closer to God than somebody else that doesn't. So the religion itself is outcome-based and is self-correcting, which is very unique also. So the laws are interpreted by universal house of justice according to the times that they're supposed to be applied. So those things are resolved. The second element was elimination of prejudices that was built into the other religion to attract people. So they were giving them some carrot and stick. The old example is that if you do not belong to this religion, this new religion, you go to hell. And if you believe that basically just say that I am this or that, now suddenly you're going to go to heaven. So in Baha'i religion, just pronouncing that you're a Baha'i doesn't do anything. The key really is actions that you're performing, how well you adopt yourself with the Holy Spirit, or these laws determine who you are. Ironic part is that, so what does it mean? It means that we have to improve ourselves. Continuously, so you're a permanent student from beginning to the end. Doesn't matter where you come to this route, is the issue of trying to adjust our behavior and our brain, our understanding, which is actually, our brains are a subjective device. It cannot detect true reality. That's why we created science, because science is precise. When you say something is warm, they say it is 65 degrees. So it is measured, is objective. But we can't tell something is warm or cooled. So the key element really is objectively knowing the truth. And Abdul Baha, which is son of Baha'u'llah, says that the sole purpose of religion is to adjust our thoughts to reality. And reality is only one. It can't be two realities. So this is really, how do you get our brains, that is a subjective machine which feels, doesn't know accurately, to an accurate, objective reality. And that's the job of the religion. So now we're looking at this story starts with how this process occurred. The first process was to align interpretation, improper interpretation of prior religion about their own basically language and their own religion. Because in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they were, of course, people literally were translating the words. Like Muhammad was saying in Quran that at the time of resurrection, which is this judgment of people that are today at the time of new manifestation coming, not accepting the new manifestation. So there were signs that they were giving, like celestial bodies would drop on earth. Obviously, if celestial bodies would drop on earth, everything evaporates. We don't need religion. We don't need God, because He would come and take it. It would be much easier to do this than so Sheikh Ahmad Asai started to define this. That look, these things that you're saying that, for example, Sunnis believe the return of Jesus is not that Jesus comes physically on a cloud. So these are allegorical language that was basically written in Quran, or for example, Old Testament and New Testament. These are allegorical, it's not literal. And this is really where the movement started, which was a major shift of thinking during the Shia Islam that, of course, a major departure from the traditional Islamic doctrine of Day of Resurrection, which basically changed completely. There isn't as much difference between Sunnis and Shias than Shaykhis and Shias and Sunnis. Because Shaykhi doctrine, although everybody believes Shaykhis were actually Shiites, but Reformed Shiites, but their differences are enormous in terms of interpreting properly the signs of the new coming. And they said that at the time that, look, this fellow is coming, 1,000 years has passed since 12th Imam disappeared, go and look for him. And this is where the story starts here. So people were prepared, and majority of those people that were disciples of Sheikh Ahmad Asai and Sayyid Kazim Rashdi, they were basically prominent scholars that grew up in that school. And each one of them had titles and followers by themselves. Interesting part is that now that the Sayyid Kazim, actually there are stories that we read previous chapter that in some instances Sayyid Kazim actually knew who the Bab was, and with their interaction, because he was one of the students or not students, but he was part of the gatherings that they had, and he sometimes referred to him. But in any case, he didn't want to divulge that truth about his station. But interestingly, during this process, after he passed away, Bab declared, and the 18 individual souls with their own will found Bab. Bab means door, a gate. So the majority of basically Abrahamic religions are looking for two comings. One was in case of Baha'is, Bab, and the other one is Baha'u'llah. So when you're looking at when Bab declared, he waited until these 18 souls joined his group, and his purpose was to send them to their own districts where they came from, to basically send this message that new religion has come in and terminated the old religion. And that's why these people had to give up their titles, their belongings, even their families would disown them. Remember, these were scholars of Shiite, and they became sheikhis, and they still were accepted as scholars. But Now that they went and found a new religion, they had to start basically from scratch. And they all been foretold by Bab that they're going to lose their lives. So they were all going to be martyred. So this need or basically responsibility they accepted with full knowledge that they're not going to come out of it alive. And this is really where the story we left it at, that these people went to different districts trying to propagate. One of them was Baha'u'llah. So at the time, obviously, nobody knew that he's the second manifestation, but now we're reading his journey when he accepted basically Bab'i religion, and he went to his own district, which is district of Nur, trying to propagate this message. And what kind of basically roadblocks he faced, because normally, again, remember, the whole ecclesiastical structure was in Shiite at the time. So they had power, and even the courts were run by mullahs and clergy at the time.
Chapter 5. Baha'u'llah's journey to Mazindaran. The first journey Baha'u'llah undertook for the purpose of promoting the revelation announced by the Bab was to his ancestral home in Nur, in the province of Mazindaran. He set out for the village of Takur, the personal estate of his father, where he owned a vast mansion royally furnished and superbly situated. It was my privilege to hear Baha'u'llah himself one day recount the following. The late Vizier, my father, enjoyed a most enviable position among his countrymen. His vast wealth, his noble ancestry, his artistic attainments, his unrivaled prestige and exalted rank made him the object of the admiration of all who knew him. For a period of over 20 years, no one among the wide circle of his family and kindred, which extended over Nur and Tehran, suffered distress, injury, or illness. They enjoyed, during a long and uninterrupted period, rich and manifold blessings. Quite suddenly, however, this prosperity and glory gave way to a series of calamities which severely shook the foundations of his material prosperity.
Okay, here the Vizier means actually minister. He was one of the ministers of the king at the time. So he had a very prestigious position in the court of the Shah. And obviously, they were prospering until this story starts. Go ahead.
We're talking about Baha'u'llah's father?
That's right. Baha'u'llah's father was, and their ancestry goes back to basically previous dynasties in Iran. So he was descendants of the kings of Iran. Go ahead.
The first loss he suffered was occasioned by a great flood which, rising in the mountains of Mazindaran, swept with great violence over the village of Takur and utterly destroyed half the mansion of the Vizier, situated above the fortress of that village. The best part of that house, which had been known for the solidity of its foundations, was utterly wiped away by the fury of the roaring torrent. Its precious articles of furniture were destroyed, and its elaborate ornamentation irretrievably ruined. This was shortly followed by the loss of various state positions which the Vizier occupied, and by the repeated assaults directed against him by his envious adversaries. Despite this sudden change of fortune, the Vizier maintained his dignity and calm, and continued, within the restricted limits of his means, his acts of benevolence and charity. He continued to exercise towards his faithless associates that same courtesy and kindness that had characterized his dealings with his fellow men. With splendid fortitude he grappled until the last hour of his life with the adversities that weighed so heavily upon him. Baha'u'llah had already, prior to the declaration of the Bab, visited the district of Nur at a time when the celebrated Mujtahid Mirza Muhammad Taqi-i Nuri was at the height of his authority and influence. Such was the eminence of his position that they who sat at his feet regarded themselves each as the authorized exponent of the faith and law of Islam. The Mujtahid was addressing a company of over 200 of such disciples and was expatiating upon the dark passage of the reported utterances of the Imams, when Baha'u'llah, followed by a number of his companions, passed by that place and paused for a while to listen to his discourse. The Mujtahid asked his disciples to elucidate an abstruse theory relating to the metaphysical aspects of the Islamic teachings. As they all confessed their inability to explain it, Baha'u'llah was moved to give, in brief but convincing language, a lucid exposition of that theory. The Mujtahid was greatly annoyed at the incompetence of his disciples. "For years I have been instructing you," he angrily exclaimed, "and have patiently striven to instill into your minds the profoundest truths and the noblest principles of the faith, and yet you allow, after all these years of persistent study, this youth, a wearer of the Kula, who has had no share in scholarly training and who is entirely unfamiliar with your academic learning, to demonstrate his superiority over you." There is a footnote. Kula, a lambskin hat, differentiated the clergy from the laity and was worn invariably by state officials. Later on, when Baha'u'llah had departed, the Mujtahid related to his disciples two of his recent dreams, the circumstances of which he believed were of the utmost significance. "In my first dream," he said, "I was standing in the midst of a vast concourse of people, all of whom seemed to be pointing to a certain house in which they said the Sahibuz Zaman dwelt."
Sahibul Zaman, this is the 12th Imam. This is another title of 12th Imam. Right, Mahdi, right, that the Muslims are waiting for. Okay.
Frantic with joy, I hastened in my dream to attain his presence. When I reached the house, I was, to my great surprise, refused admission. The promised Qaim, I was informed, is engaged in private conversation with another person. Access to them is strictly forbidden. From the guards who were standing beside the door, I gathered that the person was none other than Baha'u'llah. In my second dream, the Mujtahid continued, I found myself in a place where I beheld around me a number of coffers, each of which, it was stated, belonged to Baha'u'llah. As I opened them, I found them to be filled with books. Every word and letter recorded in these books was set with the most exquisite jewels. Their radiance dazzled me. I was so overpowered by their brilliance that I awoke suddenly from my dream.
Okay, so here the story really relates to this dream of this Mujtahid, which is the learned person of the whole province, that had a lot of clergy and junior, basically, priests under him. Right. These are Mujtahids, are people that generate fatwas, they edicts. Right, so Ayatollah, for example. So they were giving edicts, and most of the people, their students, are people that have turbans. So there were studies decades with this person, and so it's like a pope and a bishops that they go to different areas and teach themselves. So this story is that Baha'u'llah was passing by. This is before the declaration of Bab, and basically came to his gathering and answered one of the questions that he posed on some subject that was very obscure, and nobody could answer him. Baha'u'llah elucidated the situation very well. And then, of course, he got very angry at his disciples. This guy that doesn't even have a turban could elucidate this much better than you guys that have been studying this for decades. Now, interestingly, afterward, he had a dream related to basically the Qa'im or 12th Imam returned, and he was going toward them to meet the 12th Imam. Ironically, they wouldn't let him in because Baha'u'llah, the same youth, was with the Qa'im. So this is really a dream references to the both manifestation, Bab and Baha'u'llah, in terms of return of Jesus and 12th Imam. or in case of Shiites, return of Imam Hussein and Qa'im. So it's interesting that this fellow, in his dreams, and ironically, his second dream was that this youth, which was Baha'u'llah, had coffers with him, and when he opened it up, it saw many, many, many books. And it says, again, these are references that Baha'u'llah brings in so many basically edicts and laws with him. So he would write many, many books. So he actually dreamt the stations of these two manifestations way before even Bab declared it.
When, in the year 1260, AD 1844, Baha'u'llah arrived in Nur, he discovered that the celebrated Mujtahid, who on his previous visit had wielded such immense power, had passed away. The vast number of his devotees had shrunk into a mere handful of dejected disciples, who, under the leadership of his successor, Mullah Muhammad, were striving to uphold the traditions of their departed leader. The enthusiasm which greeted Baha'u'llah's arrival sharply contrasted with the gloom that had settled upon the remnants of that once flourishing community. A large number of the officials and notables in that neighborhood called upon him and, with every mark of affection and respect, accorded him a befitting welcome. They were eager, in view of the social position he occupied, to learn from him all the news regarding the life of the Shah, the activities of his ministers, and the affairs of his government. To their inquiries, Baha'u'llah replied with extreme indifference and seemed to reveal very little interest or concern. With persuasive eloquence, he pleaded the cause of the new revelation and directed their attention to the immeasurable benefits which it was destined to confer upon their country. Those who heard him marveled at the keen interest which a man of his position and age evinced for truths which primarily concerned the divines and theologians of Islam. They felt powerless to challenge the soundness of his arguments, or to belittle the cause which he so ably expounded. They admired the loftiness of his enthusiasm and the profundity of his thoughts, and were deeply impressed by his attachment and self-effacement. None dared to contend with his views except his uncle, Aziz, who ventured to oppose him, challenging his statements and aspersing their truth. When those who heard him sought to silence his opponent and to injure him, Baha'u'llah intervened in his behalf and advised them to leave him in the hands of God. Alarmed, he sought the aid of the Mujtahid of Nur, Mullah Muhammad, and appealed to him to lend him immediate assistance. "O Vice-Regent of the Prophet of God," he said, "behold what has befallen the faith. A youth, a layman, attired in the garb of nobility, has come to Nur, has invaded the stronghold of orthodoxy, and disrupted the holy faith of Islam. Arise and resist his onslaught. Whoever attains his presence falls immediately under his spell, and is enthralled by the power of his utterance. I know not whether he is a sorcerer, or whether he mixes with his tea some mysterious substance that makes every man who drinks the tea fall a victim to its charm." The Mujtahid, notwithstanding his own lack of comprehension, was able to realize the folly of such remarks. Jestingly he observed, "Have you not partaken of his tea, or heard him address his companions?" "I have," he replied, "but thanks to your loving protection, I have remained immune from the effect of his mysterious power." The Mujtahid, finding himself unequal to the task of arousing the populace against Baha'u'llah, and of combating directly the ideas which so powerful an opponent was fearlessly spreading, contented himself with a written statement in which he declared, "O Aziz, be not afraid, no one will dare molest you." In writing this, the Mujtahid had, through a grammatical error, so perverted the purport of his statement that those who read it among the notables of the village of Takur were scandalized by its meaning, and vilified both the bearer and the author of that statement. Those who attained the presence of Baha'u'llah and heard him expound the message proclaimed by the Bab were so much impressed by the earnestness of his appeal that they forthwith arose to disseminate that same message among the people of Nur and to extol the virtues of its distinguished promoter. The disciples of Mullah Muhammad, meanwhile, endeavored to persuade their teacher to proceed to Takur to visit Baha'u'llah in person, to ascertain from him the nature of this new revelation, and to enlighten his followers regarding its character and purpose. To their earnest entreaty, The Mujtahid returned an evasive answer. His disciples, however, refused to admit the validity of the objections he raised. They urged that the first obligation imposed upon a man of his position, whose function was to preserve the integrity of Shia Islam, was to inquire into the nature of every movement that tended to affect the interests of their faith. Mullah Muhammad eventually decided to delegate two of his eminent lieutenants, Mullah Abbas and Mirza Abul Qasim, both sons-in-law and trusted disciples of the late Mujtahid Mirza Muhammad Taqi, to visit Baha'u'llah and to determine the true character of the message he had brought. He pledged himself to endorse unreservedly whatever conclusions they might arrive at, and to recognize their decision in such matters as final. On being informed, upon their arrival in Takur, that Baha'u'llah had departed for his winter resort, the representatives of Mullah Muhammad decided to leave for that place. When they arrived, they found Baha'u'llah engaged in revealing a commentary on the opening surah of the Quran entitled The 7 Verses of Repetition. As they sat and listened to his discourse, the loftiness of the theme, the persuasive eloquence which characterized its presentation, as well as the extraordinary manner of its delivery, profoundly impressed them. Mullah Abbas, unable to contain himself, arose from his seat and, urged by an impulse he could not resist, walked back and stood still beside the door in an attitude of reverent submissiveness. The charm of the discourse to which he was listening had fascinated him. "You behold my condition," he told his companion as he stood trembling with emotion and eyes full of tears. "I am powerless to question Baha'u'llah. The questions I had planned to ask him have vanished suddenly from my memory. You are free either to proceed with your inquiry or to return alone to our teacher and inform him of the state in which I find myself. Tell him from me that Abbas can never again return to him. He can no longer forsake this threshold." Mirza Abul Qasim was likewise moved to follow the example of his companion. "I have ceased to recognize my teacher," was his reply. "This very moment I have vowed to God to dedicate the remaining days of my life to the service of Baha'u'llah, my true and only master."
Okay. So here is a very interesting notion when Baha'u'llah came to Nur and basically confronted with this. First, his uncle rose against him because obviously this youth was coming in and taking all the attention. And his uncle was against him and said, "Look, this guy is bewildering anybody that talks to him. It looks like he's putting something in his tea that everybody that drinks it becomes his disciple." Interestingly, the reason I'm mentioning this is up to the time that I was coming to US, Muslims believed in Iran do not drink Baha'is tea. If you go to their house, don't. Now imagine 150 years later, still these Muslims believe that if you go to the Baha'i basically houses or drink their tea, you have to be careful because they put something in the tea that makes you believe in Baha'i religion. So you see the propagation of this kind of
Is like if you have contact, you hear from them directly, then you accept it.
No, of course.
When you drink tea, you start talking, and you.
Right. No, I know, but the reality, where the source of this stuff was, it goes back all the way. And this is where superstition, and that's why religion has gotten so diluted with these anomalies that, and again, is to keep the population uneducated, to keep them distanced from the truth. And so they were using many techniques, and this was one of them, which was quite interesting. And at the time, then the Mullah Muhammad, which was basically the leader of the ecclesiastical at the time, sent two of his son-in-laws, which were actually mujtahid also, they were learned people, to go and question Baha'u'llah regarding basically this new message that he's bringing in. And guess what happened? Both of them actually came to Baha'u'llah and after listening to his words, never came back and said, look, forget about the old teacher. We have a new person that we need to follow. So it's just quite interesting. Even most of the learned people were migrating toward Baha'i religion at the time. Of course, at the time was Bab'i religion, because Bab just declared and brought in this new message to prepare the Shiites to accept return of Imam Hussein or return of Jesus generally. So this was the first manifestation announcing the coming of the Messiah, of the return of Jesus.
The news of the sudden conversion of the chosen envoys of the Mujtahid of Nur spread with bewildering rapidity through the district. It roused the people from their lethargy. Ecclesiastical dignitaries, state officials, traders and peasants all flocked to the residence of Baha'u'llah. A considerable number among them willingly espoused his cause. In their admiration for him, a number of the most distinguished among them remarked, "We see how the people of Nur have risen and rallied around you. We witness on every side evidences of their exultation. If Mullah Muhammad were also to join them, the triumph of this faith would be completely assured." "I am come to Nur," Baha'u'llah replied, "solely for the purpose of proclaiming the cause of God. I cherish no other intention. If I were told that at a distance of 100 leagues a seeker yearned for the truth and was unable to meet me, I would, gladly and unhesitatingly, hasten to his abode, and would myself satisfy his hunger. Mullah Muhammad, I am told, lives in Sa'adat Abad, a village not far distant from this place. It is my purpose to visit him and deliver to him the message of God." Desirous of giving effect to his words, Baha'u'llah, accompanied by a number of his companions, proceeded immediately to that village. Mullah Muhammad most ceremoniously received him. "I have not come to this place," Baha'u'llah observed, "to pay you an official or formal visit. My purpose is to enlighten you regarding a new and wondrous message, divinely inspired and fulfilling the promise given to Islam. Whosoever has inclined his ear to this message has felt its irresistible power and has been transformed by the potency of its grace. Tell me whatsoever perplexes your mind or hinders you from recognizing the truth." Mullah Muhammad disparagingly remarked, "I undertake no action unless I first consult the Quran. I have invariably on such occasions followed the practice of invoking the aid of God and his blessings, of opening at random his sacred book, and of consulting the first verse of the particular page upon which my eyes chance to fall. From the nature of that verse I can judge the wisdom and the advisability of my contemplated course of action." Finding that Baha'u'llah was not inclined to refuse him his request, the Mujtahid called for a copy of the Quran, opened and closed it again, refusing to reveal the nature of the verse to those who were present. All he said was this: "I have consulted the Book of God and deem it inadvisable to proceed further with this matter." A few agreed with him. The rest, for the most part, did not fail to recognize the fear which those words implied. Baha'u'llah, disinclined to cause him further embarrassment, arose and, asking to be excused, bade him a cordial farewell. One day, in the course of one of his riding excursions into the country, Baha'u'llah, accompanied by his companions, saw, seated by the roadside, a lonely youth. His hair was disheveled, and he wore the dress of a dervish. By the side of a brook he had kindled a fire, and was cooking his food and eating it. Approaching him, Baha'u'llah most lovingly inquired, "Tell me, dervish, what is it that you are doing?" "I am engaged in eating God," he bluntly replied. "I am cooking God and am burning him." The unaffected simplicity of his manners and the candor of his reply pleased Baha'u'llah extremely. He smiled at his remark and began to converse with him with unrestrained tenderness and freedom. Within a short space of time, Baha'u'llah had changed him completely. Enlightened as to the true nature of God, and with a mind purged from the idle fancy of his own people, he immediately recognized the light which that loving stranger had so unexpectedly brought him.
So here, this dervish is from the order of basically Sufis. And Sufis believe that essence of everything comes from God. So it's peace of God in everything. So that's why we're saying I'm burning God and I'm eating God, means that this consciousness of humanity creates God and a piece of God. And of course, this is, excuse me, pantheistic religion. It's really not a religion. But the essence of it obviously is an offshoot of Islam. And the idea really was that we don't need priests, because they were so against this interpretation of priests, that if we become a pious and read Quran and learn it by heart and apply it, we can become like Muhammad, close to God. We don't need any clergy. But the whole concept of Sufism is a pantheistic religion. So it's many, many gods. It's not one God. It's not a monotheistic religion in general. So if you burn wood, they say this is created by gods, and essence of God is in that too. If it's an animal that I killed and I'm cooking, or food that grows up out of the earth, is the essence of God in that too. So these words that he's talking about is a Sufi doctrine. Please read.
If we may, maybe we should make a reference to what the Mujtahid did here. I don't know if, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a culture in Islamic religion that in the book of Quran, when the surah begins with a nice sentence, on the corner of the page is written good. And when horrific things happen at the beginning of the surah, it's written bad. And Muslims of all classes, even the higher ups, what they do, they consult with the Quran, they say a prayer, and they run their finger through the book and open up. And if it says good, their intention they should follow. Something that happens. I don't know how bad.
This is a custom.
It's a custom. It's called istikharah. And this is, I believe, this is the reference to Mujtahid with opening up and closing the book. He was able, but since he did not object to Baha'u'llah. Apparently, the book had said good, but he would not bring himself and said, look, let's put this aside.
No, it's true. This custom actually exists in, like Hafiz was a poet. Hafiz's book. People consult the book by closing their eyes and wishing something and opening the book. Whichever page poem would come in is the response to their request. So this is how, and it's very similar. That's right. So these are the Persian customs. Actually, today this exists also.
That dervish, whose name was Mustafa, became so enamored with the teachings which had been instilled into his mind that, leaving his cooking utensils behind, he straightway rose and followed Baha'u'llah. On foot, behind his horse, and inflamed with the fire of his love, he chanted merrily verses of a love song which he had composed on the spur of the moment and had dedicated to his beloved. Thou art the day-star of guidance, ran its glad refrain. Thou art the light of truth. Unveil thyself to men, O revealer of the truth. Although in later years that poem obtained wide circulation among his people, and it became known that a certain dervish, surnamed Majdub, and whose name was Mustafa Beg-i Sanandaji, had, without premeditation, composed it in praise of his beloved, none seemed to be aware to whom it actually referred. Nor did anyone suspect, at a time when Baha'u'llah was still veiled from the eyes of men, that this dervish alone had recognized his station and discovered his glory. Baha'u'llah's visit to Nur had produced the most far-reaching results, and had lent a remarkable impetus to the spread of the new-born revelation. By his magnetic eloquence, by the purity of his life, and the dignity of his bearing, by the unanswerable logic of his argument, and by the many evidences of his loving kindness, Baha'u'llah had won the hearts of the people of Nur, had stirred their souls, and had enrolled them under the standard of faith. Such was the effect of his words and deeds, as he went about preaching the cause and revealing its glory to his countrymen in Nur, that the very stones and trees of that district seemed to have been quickened by the waves of spiritual power which emanated from his person. All things seemed to be endowed with a new and more abundant life. All things seemed to be proclaiming aloud, Behold, the beauty of God has been made manifest. Arise, for he has come in all his glory. The people of Nur, when Baha'u'llah had departed from out their midst, continued to propagate the cause and to consolidate its foundations. A number of them endured the severest afflictions for his sake. Others quaffed with gladness the cup of martyrdom in his path. Mazindaran in general, and Nur in particular, were thus designated from the other provinces and districts of Persia as being the first to have eagerly embraced the divine message. The district of Nur, literally meaning light, which lay embedded within the mountains of Mazindaran, was the first to catch the rays of the sun that had risen in Shiraz, the first to proclaim to the rest of Persia, which still lay enveloped in the shadow of the veil of heedlessness, that the day star of heavenly guidance had at length arisen to warm and illuminate the whole land. When Baha'u'llah was still a child, the Vizier, his father, dreamed a dream. Baha'u'llah appeared to him swimming in a vast, limitless ocean. His body shone upon the waters with a radiance that illuminated the sea. Around his head, which could distinctly be seen above the waters, there radiated in all directions his long jet-black locks, floating in great profusion above the waves. As he dreamed, a multitude of fishes gathered around him, each holding fast to the extremity of one hair. Fascinated by the effulgence of his face, they followed him in whatever direction he swam. Great as was their number, and however firmly they clung to his locks, not one single hair seemed to have been detached from his head, nor did the least injury affect his person. Free and unrestrained, he moved above the waters, and they all followed him. The Vizier, greatly impressed by this dream, summoned a soothsayer, who had achieved fame in the region, and asked him to interpret it for him. This man, as if inspired by a premonition of the future glory of Baha'u'llah, declared, "The limitless ocean that you have seen in your dream, O Vizier, is none other than the world of being. Single-handed and alone, your son will achieve supreme ascendancy over it. Wherever he may please, he will proceed unhindered. No one will resist his march. No one will hinder his progress. The multitude of fishes signifies the turmoil which he will arouse amidst the peoples and kindreds of the earth. Around him will they gather, and to him will they cling. Assured of the unfailing protection of the Almighty, this tumult will never harm his person, nor will his loneliness upon the sea of life endanger his safety." That soothsayer was subsequently taken to see Baha'u'llah. He looked intently upon his face and examined carefully his features. He was charmed by his appearance and extolled every trait of his countenance. Every expression in that face revealed to his eyes a sign of his concealed glory. So great was his admiration and so profuse his praise of Baha'u'llah that the Vizier, from that day, became even more passionately devoted to his son. The words spoken by that soothsayer served to fortify his hopes and confidence in him. Like Jacob, he desired only to ensure the well-being of his beloved Joseph and to surround him with his loving protection. Haji Mirza Akazi, the Grand Vizier of Muhammad Shah, though completely alienated from Baha'u'llah's father, showed his son every mark of consideration and favor. So great was the esteem which the Haji professed for him, that Mirza Akka Khan-i Nuri, the Itimadud Dawli, who afterwards succeeded Haji Mirza Akazi, felt envious. He resented the superiority which Baha'u'llah, as a mere youth, was accorded over him. The seeds of jealousy were, from that time, implanted in his breast. Though still a youth, and while his father is yet alive, he thought, "He is given precedence in the presence of the Grand Vizier. What will, I wonder, happen to me when this young man shall have succeeded his father?" After the death of the Vizier, Haji Mirza Akazi continued to show the utmost consideration to Baha'u'llah. He would visit him at his home, and would address him as though he were his own son. The sincerity of his devotion, however, was very soon put to the test. One day, as he was passing through the village of Kuchhizar, which belonged to Baha'u'llah, he was so impressed by the charm and beauty of that place, and the abundance of its water, that he conceived the idea of becoming its owner. Baha'u'llah, whom he had summoned to effect the immediate purchase of that village, observed, "Had this property been exclusively mine own, I would willingly have complied with your desire. This transitory life, with all its sordid possessions, is worthy of no attachment in my eyes, how much less this small and insignificant estate. As a number of other people, both rich and poor, some of full age and some still minors, share with me the ownership of this property, I would request you to refer this matter to them and to seek their consent." Unsatisfied with this reply, Haji Mirza Akazi sought, through fraudulent means, to achieve his purpose. So soon as Baha'u'llah was informed of his evil designs, he, with the consent of all concerned, immediately transferred the title of the property to the name of the sister of Muhammad Shah, who had already repeatedly expressed her desire to become its owner.
Hold on. So this is very important to know regarding Haj Mirza Aghasi. Later on we see he becomes one of the ardent enemies of the Baha'i Bab'is at the time. He was the Grand Vizier. That means he was the Prime Minister. He controlled everything.
He controlled the Shah.
Right. So, and most of these guys were also the teacher of the Shah when he was young. So they had a very pupil and teacher relationship. And most of them and this guy that came to power, he was a very conniving man. And interestingly, because the Baha'u'llah's father was one of the prominent viziers or ministers, he thought his son, which was Baha'u'llah, would basically occupy that seat. And this was traditional in the government, where if the father passed away, they would give, of course the son had to be able to do the job, would occupy that seat in the government. And that's why he was very cordial to Baha'u'llah. And
This is the guy who's titled
I'Temadud-Dawla, yeah, I believe so.
the officer.
Mirza Khan Nuri, yes, I'Temadud-Dawla. Means the trusted of the God, of the court.
So was
Okay.
he working to acquire this village? Is that what he was doing?
Yeah, Baha'u'llah owned this village with a bunch of other people. This guy, because he was the prime minister and he had all the power, he wanted to own it himself. He came to Baha'u'llah and said, look, you can have my share, but I can't speak about other people that own it. You have to go and get their permission to transfer the deeds to you. And this guy was conniving enough to say, look, the way to do it is very simple. I go and make this property to the name of the, I think, sister of the Shah. Nobody can object to that because, by the way, in the laws, Shah owned every piece of land. So they could take it back because it's theirs. So nobody could have ownership that say, okay, you have to buy it back from me. Shah could take it away. So that was the trick he played. He said, look, this belongs to the basically kingdom, and sister of Shah wants this village, so they would take it back. So this was a legal way of taking away property of people. And that's exactly what he did. And he had, of course, methods to gain it for himself later on.
The Haji, furious at this transaction, ordered that the estate should be forcibly seized, claiming that he already had purchased it from its original possessor. The representatives of Haji Mirza Akazi were severely rebuked by the agents of the sister of the Shah, and were requested to inform their master of the determination of that lady to assert her rights. The Haji referred the case to Muhammad Shah, and complained of the unjust treatment to which he had been subjected. That very night, the Shah's sister had acquainted him with the nature of the transaction. Many a time, she said to her brother, your Imperial Majesty has graciously signified your desire that I should dispose of the jewels with which I am wont to adorn myself in your presence, and with the proceeds purchase some property. I have at last succeeded in fulfilling your desire. Haji Mirza Akazi, however, is now fully determined to seize it forcibly from me. The Shah reassured his sister and commanded the Haji to forego his claim. The latter, in his despair, summoned Baha'u'llah to his presence and, by every artifice, strove to discredit his name. To the charges he brought against him, Baha'u'llah vigorously replied and succeeded in establishing his innocence. In his impotent rage, the Grand Vizier exclaimed, "What is the purpose of all this feasting and banqueting in which you seem to delight? I, who am the Prime Minister of the Shahanshah of Persia, never receive the number and variety of guests that crowd around your table every night. Why all this extravagance and vanity? You surely must be meditating a plot against me." "Gracious God," Baha'u'llah replied, "is the man who, out of the abundance of his heart, shares his bread with his fellow men to be accused of harboring criminal intentions?" Haji Mirza Akazi was utterly confounded. He dared no reply. Though supported by the combined ecclesiastical and civil powers of Persia, he eventually found himself, in every contest he ventured against Baha'u'llah, completely defeated. On a number of other occasions, Baha'u'llah's ascendancy over his opponents was likewise vindicated and recognized. These personal triumphs, achieved by him, served to enhance his position and spread abroad his fame. All classes of men marveled at his miraculous success in emerging unscathed from the most perilous encounters. Nothing short of divine protection, they thought, could have ensured his safety on such occasions. Not once did Baha'u'llah, beset though he was by the gravest perils, submit to the arrogance, the greed, and the treachery of those around him. In his constant association during those days with the highest dignitaries of the realm, whether ecclesiastical or state officials, he was never content simply to accede to the views they expressed or the claims they advanced. He would, at their gatherings, fearlessly champion the cause of truth, would assert the rights of the downtrodden, defending the weak and protecting the innocent.
Okay, great. So this was the endeavor of Baha'u'llah in Nur and Mazindaran to really go after the basically ecclesiastical order, trying to persuade them to join this new cause. And through this process, obviously, because he was connected through his father to the king's court, this Grand Vizier, although he was initially very cordial and loved Baha'u'llah, turned against him throughout the history of Bab'i revelation, and basically shows that he did whatever he could in his power to quench this fire of this new revelation, and he was not successful at the end. Okay.
Chapter 6, Mullah Husayn's journey to Khurasan. As the Bab bade farewell to the letters of the living, he instructed them each and all to record separately the name of every believer who embraced the faith and identified himself with its teachings. The list of these believers he bade them enclosed in sealed letters and addressed them to his maternal uncle Haji Mirza Syed Ali in Shiraz, who would in turn deliver them to him. "I shall classify these lists," he told them, "into 18 sets of 19 names each. Each set will constitute one Wahid." A footnote says the numerical value of the word Wahid, which means unity, is 19. All these names in these 18 sets will, together with the first Wahid, consisting of my own name and those of the 18 letters of the living, constitute the number of Kul-i-Shay. A footnote says the numerical value of Kul-i-Shay, which means all things, is 361, or 19 times 19. Of all these believers I shall make mention in the tablet of God, so that upon each one of them the beloved of our hearts may, in the day when he shall have ascended the throne of glory, confer his inestimable blessings, and declare them the dwellers of his paradise.
Okay, so here, what we're discussing here is Bob basically leaving instructions and the names of those 18 souls that joined his cause to his maternal uncle for the safekeeping of when Baha'u'llah, or this promised one, return of Jesus or return of Imam Hussein, would occur, would have his blessing on these 18 souls, including his name was 19. And the Kullan Shay means all there is, numerical value, which means all things. So these are the basically complete set. And the during the manifestation, these new manifestations, coming of the manifestation, he prophesied that all the sciences that man could learn would get revealed during this dispensation. So everything that was hidden from humanity, from a science point of view, would get basically discovered. And he said up to that point, only 2 letters, 2 out of this many, were discovered. During this dispensation, the energies of humanity would get released, and the basically humanity would discover the rest of sciences generally. So this was the power of creating unity of mankind that would releases humanity to find these anomalies. And of course, Baha'is believe that the source of augmentation or increase of civilization is the new manifestation that creates a new generation of discoveries and releases. If you compare, for example, advancement of civilization and sciences during last century and a half, is not even comparable to the discoveries from beginning of the time up to that minute. So these revelations that come in, every revelation, including Islamic, for example, revelation, created the golden age of sciences and discoveries. So every infusion of the Holy Spirit causes humanity to lift. And the discoveries, physical discoveries, occur as well.
To Mullah Hussein, more particularly, the Bab gave definite injunctions to send him a written report on the nature and progress of his activities in Isfahan, in Tehran, and in Khurasan. He urged him to inform him of those who accepted and submitted to the faith, as well as of those who rejected and repudiated its truth. Not until I receive your letter from Khurasan, he said, shall I be ready to set out from this city on my pilgrimage to Hijaz. Mullah Hussein, refreshed and fortified by the experience of his intercourse with Baha'u'llah, set out on his journey to Khurasan. During his visit to that province, he exhibited in an astonishing manner the effects of that regenerating power with which the parting words of the Bab had invested him. The first to embrace the faith in Khurasan was Mirza Ahmad-i Ajghamdi, the most learned, the wisest, and the most eminent among the ulamas of that province. In whatever gathering he appeared, no matter how great the number or representative the character of the divines who were present, he alone was invariably the chief speaker. The high traits of his character, as well as his extreme devoutness, had ennobled the reputation which he had already acquired through his erudition, his ability, and wisdom. The next to embrace the faith among the sheikhs of Khurasan was Mullah Ahmad-i Muallim, who, while in Kabila, had been the instructor of the children of Sayyid Qasim. Next to him came Mullah Sheikh Ali, whom the Bab surnamed Azim, and then Mullah Mirza Muhammad-i Furuhi, whose learning was unsurpassed except by that of Mirza Ahmad. No one apart from these outstanding figures among the ecclesiastical leaders of Khurasan exercised sufficient authority or possessed the necessary knowledge to challenge the arguments of Mullah Hussain. Mirza Muhammad Baqir-i Qaini, who, for the remaining years of his life, had established his residence in Mashhad, was the next to embrace the message. The love of the Bab inflamed his soul with such a consuming passion that no one could resist its force or could belittle its influence. His fearlessness, his unsparing energy, his unswerving loyalty, and the integrity of his life all combined to make him the terror of his enemies and a source of inspiration to his friends. He placed his home at the disposal of Mullah Hussain, arranged for separate interviews between him and the ulamas of Mashhad, and continued to endeavour to the utmost of his power to remove every obstacle that might impede the progress of the faith. He was untiring in his efforts, undeviating in his purpose, and inexhaustible in his energy. He continued to labour indefatigably for his beloved cause until the last hour of his life, when he fell a martyr at the fort of Sheikh Tabasi. In his last days, he was bidden by Qudus, after the tragic death of Mullah Hussain, to assume the leadership of the heroic defenders of that fort. He acquitted himself gloriously of his task. His home, situated in Bala Qiyaban, in the city of Mashhad, is up to the present time known by the name Bab'i. Whoever enters it can never escape the accusation of being a Bab'i. May his soul rest in peace.
Okay, so, right, that's right. This tea was very, very potent. Right, so the whole issue here of basically Bab giving directions to Mullah Hussain, which was the first, or Bab'u'llah was the first one who believed in Bab, to go to those 3 cities ending up in Khurasan, basically addressing those sheikhs as well as the learned people in those areas to really bring him this message. And remember, these sheikhs themselves were in a school of sheikhi, was learned people of Shiite descent, where they actually accepted this transition from literal to allegorical and were expecting the coming of the 12th Imam. So his duty was to go and convince them that the 12th Imam or Mahdi has arrived. And these are the new laws and generation of edicts that he brought with himself to prepare the community for the acceptance of Messiah or return of Imam Hussein. So ironically, remember, in this environment, these people were all learned and they had their own disciples and their own schools and basically status in the society, and a lot of them were basically funded by the people as well. So they had businesses, and because at the time these schools were really funded by donations of peoples and so on and so forth. Now imagine when Mullah Hussain was trying to go and tell them that this new manifestation has come in, this detachment that these Huruf Hay, or these 18 disciples of Bab, were coming, they had to basically detach themselves for all the material things that they had, as well as detachment to their own families, their own disciples, and so on and so forth, to be able to propagate this message. So what Mullah Hussain was doing was basically trying to tell those disciples of Sheikh Ahmad or Sheikhis to do the same. And imagine, majority of them obviously didn't want to leave their status because they still were called Shiites. Although they were reformed, or they called them Sheikhis, but they really were Muslims still. And now this fellow is coming in and said, look, you have to wash everything away, and because they would lose their disciples overnight if they said that there is a new manifestation has come. So out of those, only 3 of the disciples of Shaykh Ahmad accepted the Bab'i religion and new dispensation.